Picture this. You build your house on a patch of land that sits below the surface of the ocean, not a little below, some of it nearly 7 meters below. And then you invite 17 million neighbors to live there with you. About 26% of the Netherlands is below sea level, and 59% is vulnerable to flooding from high tides and severe storms. That is not a geography quirk. That is a permanent, daily, existential dare. And the Dutch answer to that dare is one of the most jaw-dropping engineering achievements in human history, the Delta Works. Today we are breaking it all down. The disaster that started it, the structures that stopped the ocean, and the ingenious tricks engineers pulled off to make it work. Buckle up, because this is the story of a small country that looked the North Sea dead in the eye and said, "Not today." But before we get to the solution, we need to feel the problem. And the problem arrived in the early hours of February the 1st, 1953. The night was already brutal, a savage winter storm hammering the North Sea, spring tides running high. A tidal surge of up to 3.36 meters overwhelmed sea defenses across Zeeland, South Holland, and North Brabant. The peak waters came in darkness, surprising people in their sleep. Dikes that had stood for generations gave way. Floodwater covered 1/6 of the Netherlands, reaching 40 miles inland in some places. 1,836 people died. Livestock drowned by the tens of thousands. Entire villages were swallowed. In many regions, the only transport possible was by boat. The Dutch called it the watersnoodramp, the water disaster, a national trauma, a wake-up call so brutal it could not be ignored. Within 20 days, a Delta Committee was established. The plan had actually been brewing for years, championed by hydraulic engineer Johan van Veen, considered the father of the Delta Works. Van Veen had been warning about the vulnerability of the Dutch coastline for decades, but nobody listened until the sea made the argument for him. He lived just long enough to see his plan approved. On December the 9th, 1959, he died of a heart attack on a train to yet another project. A man who gave everything to keep his country dry and never got to see it finished. So, what was the plan? The core idea was elegant in its ambition. Instead of raising every dike along hundreds of kilometers of jagged, irregular coastline, the plan would shorten the coastline from an irregular line of hundreds of kilometers to a more or less straight line of just 80 kilometers, with 25 kilometers of dams. Fewer exposed edges meant fewer points of failure. A masterstroke. The Dutch government unanimously accepted the Delta Act in 1958. Now, here is where things get truly interesting, because the Dutch did not just build one big thing. They built a whole sequence of increasingly complex structures, deliberately starting with the simpler ones and working up to the monsters. Engineers chose to complete the works in logical order, smallest to largest, simplest to most complicated, learning as much as possible along the way. Think of it like leveling up in a video game, except the final boss is a 9-kilometer wall of steel and concrete, standing between your country and the Atlantic. The early dams, the Grevelingen Dam, the Volkerak Dam, the Brewers Dam, were enormous achievements, sealing off estuaries and creating new inland water bodies. The Grevelingen Meer, created by 2 of those dams, became the largest inland body of salt water in Western Europe. And as each structure went up, engineers refined their techniques and their understanding of what the sea could throw at them. Then came the Haringvliet sluices, 17 gates, several kilometers of dam, and a shipping lock. These gates had to do something almost contradictory: keep the North Sea out while letting the Rhine drain into it. Too much blockage and rivers flood inland. Too little, and the sea pushes back in. The engineers designed a system smart enough to breathe, exhaling river water when needed, slamming shut when the sea surged. That is not just engineering. That is a conversation with nature. Here is a question for you. If you were designing the Eastern Scheldt Barrier, would you have chosen a solid, closed dam, simpler, cheaper, guaranteed to hold, or a complex, movable gate system that keeps the ecosystem alive but costs far more and has never been built before? Comment your answer below. Because the engineers actually changed their minds mid-project, and the decision that followed changed everything. The Eastern Scheldt Barrier, the Oosterscheldekering, is the crown jewel of the Delta Works, and its story has a dramatic twist. The original plan called for a solid dam, which would have eliminated tidal flow and turned the Eastern Scheldt into fresh water. Simple. Done. Except the fishing communities of Zeeland went ballistic. Oyster and mussel industries that had thrived for generations would be wiped out overnight. Environmentalists raised the alarm about ecosystems collapsing. Public pressure built until the government could not ignore it. In 1976, they agreed to an entirely different design, a semi-open barrier that preserved tidal ebb and flow in a controlled manner. What they built had never existed at that scale anywhere on Earth. 9 kilometers long, 65 pillars standing 30 to 40 meters high, 62 sliding doors, each 42 meters wide. Each pillar weighs 18,000 tons. To place them, engineers built an artificial island in the middle of the estuary, Neeltje Jans, as a construction platform. The parts were built in a dry dock. The area flooded, and a fleet of special ships lifted the pillars into their final positions. Under normal conditions, the gates stay open. Tides flow in and out. Oysters thrive. Seabirds feed on the mudflats. The gates only close during exceptionally high water. A sign at the barrier captures the philosophy perfectly. Here the tide, the moon, the wind, and we go together. The Eastern Scheldt Barrier is referred to as a modern wonder of the world, the most impressive and expensive piece of civil engineering in the Netherlands. It was officially opened on October 4, 1986 by Queen Beatrix, but the Delta Works were not finished yet. One more problem remained, and it was a riddle wrapped in a contradiction. Rotterdam, Europe's largest port. Areas around the city lie more than 6 meters below sea level. It needed protection from storm surges just as much as Zeeland did. But you cannot slam a dam across the Nieuwe Waterweg. About 300 ships pass through daily, and closing the channel costs the port 10 million euros a day. So, what do? You build something that has never existed before, the Maes-Lankering. The Maes-Lankering is the world's largest movable storm surge barrier, 2 massive steel arms, one on each side of the channel, that lock together in the middle to block a storm tide of up to 5 meters. Each arm is longer than the Eiffel Tower. They take 30 minutes to close and a further 90 minutes to submerge completely. And they float. The arms fill with water to sink into place. There are 2 doors, each 210 meters wide and 22 meters high, settling onto the seabed. The part that is genuinely science fiction, the Maes-Lankering, is controlled by a computer. The decision to close is made automatically because the probability of human error is too high under severe storm conditions. When the predicted water level hits 3 meters above normal, it just goes. No committee meeting, no bureaucratic delay. The hinges holding those enormous arms used the world's largest ball joints, 10 meters in diameter, built specifically for this barrier. Everything about this structure had to be invented from scratch. On the 10th of May 1997, Queen Beatrix opened the Maeslantkering, and with that, the Delta Works were complete. 43 years of construction, dams, sluices, locks, dikes, and storm surge barriers stitched into a single breathing system. Spanning roughly 1,000 kilometers, the works consist of more than a dozen major components. The construction shortened the total length of flood defenses by 700 kilometers. The risk framework pioneered by the Delta Works Commission is now used by engineers all over the world. And it works. In December 2023, Storm Pia created a surge reaching 3 meters above normal high tide, forcing the Maeslantkering to close for the first time in 26 years. Rotterdam stayed dry. Barely a headline. That is the point. The best engineering is the disaster that never happens. Now the Delta Works face their next great test: climate change. Rising sea levels are increasing pressure on the system, prompting upgrades including new sluices and expanded pumping capacity. The total program cost is projected at 38 billion euros between 2015 and 2050. The Dutch are not resting on their laurels. They are already building the next chapter. And that, really, is the lesson of the Delta Works. It is not just about concrete and steel and computer-controlled gates. It is about a country that refused to accept its geography as its fate. It took decades. It took the smartest engineers on the planet inventing solutions that did not exist yet. It took the humility to change direction when the original plan was wrong, and the courage to attempt things no one had ever attempted before. The Netherlands took on the ocean itself, and remarkably, astonishingly, stubbornly, it won. If you want to see more stories about the engineering feats that quietly hold our world together, hit subscribe. And if you have ever visited the Delta Works, or you live in the Netherlands and this is just your Tuesday, drop a comment. I genuinely want to hear what it feels like to stand on top of a 9-kilometer barrier and know it is the only thing between you and the North Sea.